But there have been many other examples over the years, including the CIA encouraging the Chilean military to overthrow the elected government of Salvador Allende, who was an odious socialist. I'm not going to defend the man. But the result was a brutal 16-year-long dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet and a lot of resentment throughout Latin America. Let me describe in some detail the aftermath of the CIA coup that restored the Shah of Iran to power. The United States government treated the Shah not just as another strategic player in the world with whom we wanted some cooperation, but as a valued friend. Lyndon Johnson, for example, praised the Shah's dedicated, inspirational, and progressive leadership. And the Shah's success, according to Johnson, was all the more remarkable because he was, quote, winning progress without violence and without any bloodshed, a lesson that others will have to learn. The tangible manifestation of Washington's friendship with the Shah included U.S. military equipment and training for SAVAK, the Shah's infamous secret police. Such actions made the United States a direct accomplice in all of the Iranian government's abuses against its own people. And there were abuses aplenty. The regime routinely imprisoned anyone suspected of being a critic. And by the 1970s, political prisoners numbered in the tens of thousands. And such prisoners were not treated gently. Torture methods included the usual tactics of police states, including sleep deprivation, electric shock, whipping, beating the soles of feet, extractions of fingernails, and rape. But SAVAK was unusually creative. Its torture techniques included the insertion of broken glass into the rectum, the pouring of boiling water into the rectum, tying weights to testicles, extraction of teeth, and mutilation of women's breasts. It also included the use of an apparatus that, when worn over the head of the victim, magnified his own screams. And then there was cooking, strapping the victim to a bed of wiring that was then heated, thus cooking the victim alive. Now, I realize in a post-9/11 environment, perhaps that only constitutes enhanced interrogation techniques, not torture. But at the time, that was considered torture. I think the moral low point in the U.S. relationship with the Shah came on New Year's Eve 1977, when President Jimmy Carter, that model of enthusiasm for human rights, rose to make a toast to the Shah during a visit to Washington. I'm quoting from Carter now. "Iran, because of the great leadership of the Shah, is an island of stability in one of the more troubled regions of the world. This is a great tribute to you, Your Majesty, and to your leadership, and to the respect and admiration and love which your people give to you." Apparently concluding that America's vocal enthusiasm for the Shah and his policies during the previous quarter century had not linked the United States sufficiently to his fate, the President went on to emphasize, quote, "We have no other nation on earth which is closer to us in planning for our mutual security," unquote. Barely a year later, the beloved Shah's regime lay in ruins, replaced by a virulently anti-American government. And on one occasion during early 1979, directly following the Islamic Revolution, more than a million people surged through the streets of Tehran, screaming at the top of their lungs, "Death to America." That was the reward that we got for our policy of supporting the Shah. This illustrates a very important point. Hatred of America has been building for decades. Granted, George W. Bush has certainly done a tremendous amount to damage America's reputation in the world. But as the Iranian episode shows, the problem did not begin with him. And unfortunately, it won't end with him. The reality is the United States has been the patron to an assortment of tyrants and torturers over the decades. In addition to the Shah, we have backed many, many others: the Saudi royal family, Egypt's Hosni Mubarak, Nicaragua's Anastasio Somoza, a succession of South Korean dictators for more than 30 years, Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, Mobutu Sese Seko in Zaire, Pervez Musharraf in Pakistan, and on and on and on and on ad nauseum. Oppressed peoples understandably blame America, not just their own dictator, for their plight. Now, in addition to the activities of our military, the CIA, and our political, very public backing of tyrants, we have the international war on drugs. This aspect hasn't received as much attention as I think it should in terms of how many enemies it has made in the world. U.S. officials, certainly since the early 1970s, have pressured governments to wage war on their own populations. A prime example of this is Plan Colombia. This was launched in 2000, and which has now become a multi-billion-dollar bribe to the government of Colombia, and lesser amounts, I might add, to the governments of Peru and Bolivia, to conduct vigorous crop eradication programs. And that's primarily to go after the coca plant, the raw material for cocaine. You have to understand, in a lot of these drug-source countries, for poor farmers, growing coca is often the difference between dire poverty and having a decent standard of living. And not surprisingly, they don't look kindly on campaigns to destroy their livelihood. So any aspect of the international war on drugs tends to be viewed very negatively by them. But the crop eradication program, pushed and funded by Washington, is indiscriminate in its destructive effects. The chemicals sprayed from planes over wide areas in drug-source countries destroys legal crops, including essential food crops, as well as the coca plant. The chemical also causes disturbing health effects, especially in children in the areas sprayed. One family, for example, in Putumayo province in Colombia, has had its crops sprayed 3 times in the past 4 years. The interesting thing about that is that they don't even grow coca. They simply grow food crops, but somehow the U.S. and Colombian authorities have gotten it in their heads that they are coca farmers. Now on the brink of starvation and also sick from the effects of the chemicals, that family is begging the Colombian government for compensation, and they have waited 4 long years without any benefit. You can imagine how popular the United States is among Colombian peasants these days. They may be uneducated, but they know who is responsible for this evil campaign against them. But because the drug crop eradication program has worked so well in winning hearts and minds in Colombia and other countries in Latin America, Washington has now tried to apply the same strategy in Afghanistan. Well, this has had the problem of complicating the U.S.-led war against al-Qaeda and the Taliban.